very much for introducing me. Thank you very much for this invitation, Mario, and for the general introduction into the Compendium initiative. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference. It is a great honor for me to be invited to contribute to your meeting. So thank you very much. The title of my presentation is Globalization, Nationalism and Interculturality, Challenges in Arts Education. Please allow me to give a brief explanation of this topic I have chosen. In July, Helen Johnson asked me to give the speech, and she proposed a topic: Arts Education Research in Turbulent Times. And Helen explained that had been very general, and I quote from the email she sent me. Economic crisis, migration, digitalization, which effects do these international and ongoing dynamics have on our work? How should we innovate research in arts and cultural education to answer these challenges, to maintain the quality of our labor and to ensure that it is future-proof? Wow, that's an all-encompassing. Of course, we have common ground in the diagnosis, and I think all of you will agree. Yes, we are living in turbulent times, and these turbulences are influencing us. Even more, they are troubling us. They are of great concern. But I had to narrow down Helen's all-encompassing approach. Thus, I decided to focus on what is worrying me most, the relation between globalization, nationalism, and perhaps populism and interculturality, and how we can answer these challenges by the means of research. We are living in turbulent times, and I show you faces that represent what worries me. Let me show some of them, only a few. Many more faces can be added, a long, long list. It looks quite strange confronting these pictures with pictures of practicing arts education. What a contrast. Also, research in arts education, like you do with the Compendium Consortium, seems to be in marginalized position when we talk about populism. It looks like that arts education has something harmless, naive, and that research in arts education could become superfluous, a waste of time. Interestingly, this is not true. The populist leaders take cultural and cultural education very serious. As chair of ENO, the European Network of Observatories in Arts Education, I know how some of our members struggle very hard with counterproductive tendencies in their respective countries. For instance, if you look at the right face, ENO in the United Kingdom, they wanted to have support by the National Commission of UNESCO for their initiative. And the National Commission of UNESCO was hindered by the Foreign Ministry to support ENO in UK. Or, for instance, in Austria, the unit which is collaborating with us is going to be abolished within the next 2 or 3 months. Or if you look at Poland, some fear after the elections in end of October in the region of Krakow caused the same fear that this unit will be abolished as well. I'm fully aware that this development will touch similar initiatives like also the Compendium one day. It already stopped the activities of Peter Inkay, who is here with us, and who is our panelist today. I'm very happy to be able to welcome you here today. I'm showing you Peter's last memo from April this year that affected me deeply. I didn't know how to react. Speechless, I still don't have an answer to his last memo. I'm sorry for this quite emotional beginning and opening, but I had to say this. I'm going to proceed more factual by coming back to the questions Helen gave me. But before this, please let me mention something that is essential to survive in turbulent times. Collaboration, or as Mario said, networking. Only together we will be able to face today's challenges. We have to develop strategies that how we can strengthen cooperation between all stakeholders in their respective places, with their respective roles. And this is a kind of systematic grid of how the different stakeholders in the field could share their work. And for me, this approach means that we have to strengthen all of these four pillars. And this leads me now to the topic or question Helen has given me. How can we innovate research in arts and cultural education to answer these challenges, to maintain the quality of our labor, and to ensure that it is future-proof? In my speech, I'm going to tackle three aspects. I deleted the fourth one. We have to understand better what we are doing when we do arts education. The second one is we have to be aware of the language we use when we talk about arts education. And the third one, we have to create knowledge how arts education in a diverse world can be conceived or shaped. My experience, not only in Germany, but also in international networks, my experience shows that we have huge differences in respect to the understandings of arts education. But we always use the same term. And the only term, it's just arts education. Obviously, this term works like a container. There are different meanings, but apparently with a nucleus of common understanding. Sometimes there are big tensions, that's what I can observe. There's a big distrust between the different positions in this container. This happens without clarifying where the differences really are. This suspicion is not surprising, as all use only the one term for different things. This is not only a methodological problem, it has negative consequences. This distrust hinders considerations whether, for instance, the concepts are really competing, or in other words, are in a contradiction. Whether the differences could perhaps complementing each other. Each situation needs another answer, also in arts education. But rivalry between adequate, good, or at least interesting position will weaken the field. Having said so, please follow me now on a short trip into practice. A very short trip, trying to develop a systematic theoretical structure regarding the question what arts education is. I will show you two very, very different practice examples via video clips. And both represent two different, quite different concepts. Before I start, I have to explain something about the sources they are from. Members of our international network sent them to me, and I had asked them to send an outstanding and convincing example of arts education practice that can illustrate their respective own understanding. So this is the background part. I will start with a short video clip of a small black boy observing rain, sent by Mashmid D. You can observe the boy in the short video that an influential art educator in India published on his blog in order to demonstrate his ideas. It is a very quiet video, although we hear a lot of noise. And the most important thing is probably that nothing happens, despite the observing of rain by a boy. Let us see this short 2 minutes video. For outstanding examples of arts education that represents the respective position of the person who sent this example. I think we can all imagine the experience the boy has, the central experience of nature and of himself. So nature is an aesthetic space for him, like the slides you showed. And I have to add something which I think is very important. I could observe in this clip another aspect for this kind of approach. Obviously, there is no intervention by an adult or a teacher. The main role of the adults is to provide the free and secure space, especially in India, which is necessary to develop this kind of contemplative observation of rain, of a puddle, and of earth. The boy is totally focused and concentrated, not aware of the noise made by his mates. He interacts with his environment by a kind of playing. The rain is part of the game, not a disturbance. I think this is a very characteristic position we can find in arts education. It is rooted in a long European philosophical tradition, for instance in Romanticism and in European Enlightenment. The romantic idea of education, as formulated for instance by Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Friedrich Schiller, states that self-formation through playful sensual experience is an essential component of what we call Bildung. And this concept is still very vivid in today's arts education. We can find it all over Europe. The second example I would like to share with you is quite the opposite. It shows a dancer interacting with people in the public space. His topic is climate change. Mario mentioned this relevant topic. Mark Harvey, a dancer, created this performance as a part of the so-called Maldives Exodus show. The background is that climate change or climate issues are affecting mostly the so-called low-lying states like the Maldives Island in the Pacific Ocean. Political climate wrestlers, this is the name of this project, was a live dance performance. The wrestle was performed by Mark at the Biennale in Venice. He defined an area in the park, in the Giardini, and invited members of the public to wrestle with him about climate issues. Mark explained to the participants that, as they wrestled, he would ask questions and give facts about climate change. He invited the co-wrestlers to respond, using his or her body and voice to agree or to disagree. Each wrestle lasted for several minutes, and each wrestle attracted larger audiences, who would also start to voice views and opinions about climate change. Let's now see the 2 minutes video again.
Argue with politics, and climate change, and also to wrestle with them. All of us do all the time is related to climate change.
No.
You don't agree?
I disagree. I completely disagree.
I disagree that you disagree.
Then I'm confused.
See the caravan, we're prepared in case the Maldives goes under the sea, when it does in 50 years' time, right? Because climate change. And you say climate change is good.
Yeah, because I like it when it's warm.
You like it when it's warm? Yeah, my rule is, we have a number of rules, but we don't kicking, punching, scratching, biting.
No, and there's no arguing about that.
There's no arguing about that. I'm okay. Are you okay? Yeah. That was very good, very good. I still think it's wrong.
Mark managed the physical interchange expertly, ensuring that the wrestle was really about ideas and not personal. And these ideas focus on relevant, important environmental issues. Thus, this kind of arts education is no longer focusing on the self-formation of an individual through sensual experiences in nature. It tackles extremely relevant social, political, and societal issues with controversial political debates. Starting from these 2 examples, we can develop now a systematic grid. Of course, this needs a longer and more intensive exploration of practice, but this cannot be to take place here now. The systematic grids I would like to share with you shows 4 main dimensions in arts education. So we can distinguish through the analysis of practice. 1 dimension that follows the concept of education in the arts, and 3 that follows the concept of education through the arts, the economic, the social-political, and the economic dimension. As mentioned, I cannot go deeper into this due to the limitation of time, but as you are all experts in the field of cultural policy, I hope, or I know, that I can be brief and somehow superficial at this point. What we can do now in the next step is to analyze the practice examples according to these 4 dimensions proposed. This allows us to see clear similarities and differences. Both examples don't focus, for instance, the economic impact. We know this economic orientation from creativity discourses in arts education, for instance, triggered by the OECD. By the way, the economic dimension is quite weak in all the examples in this term. Also, the educational transfer effects can be considered as less important in a similar way. But we can find significant differences in respect to the two further dimensions, whereas the climate wrestle has a clear social political profile. The example with the boy in the rain shows an orientation on education in the arts, with the goal of self-formation. So it's arts for art's sake. This example is rooted in the idea of the intrinsic value of the arts per se. Please allow me now a second remark on this. It is important to see that already in these two examples we face in each one a combination of different dimensions. And this specific mixture shapes the respective profile of each project. This world is not black or white. It is due to the complexity, I think, of culture, hybridity, and a certain, I would call it blurriness, is obviously typical for artistic approaches in education. Having said this, the consequence is that none of the profiles is wrong. They have different target groups, different goals, and they use different methods. And thus, the mixtures, the profiles, have to be different as well. As already mentioned, this kind of evaluating projects can help us to understand their specific characteristics. It's not the intention to highlight one project, one approach, and to devalue or depreciate the other one. I'm coming back to Helen's starting point. Helen asked me to say something about what kind of research is needed to face the current challenges mentioned in the beginning. I'm not sure whether I'm able to give you any recommendation, but please allow me to compare this, what I just tried to explore and explain, with the grid the Compendium is currently still using. That's what I learned. There will be a new one. I didn't know this. And in the field of arts education, the approach of the Compendium is, this is my observation, is a very formal one. It's describing mainly its structures, except point 833. And from this I miss a broader qualitative approach. Perhaps you could discuss this question in your meeting here. Especially in the difficult political situation we are at the moment, it is, from my point of view, important to include content-related aspects, like the profiles, for instance, of arts education approaches or measures as well. The dimension proposed could help, perhaps, to start such a discussion. Now I would like to come to my second point, that is not only a side issue, even though it cannot be deepened here. What we need as well is a specific sensitivity towards the language we use when we discuss our topics. And here, research could be also perhaps helpful. Just one example. The second word in the term arts education, the term education. Some months ago, I asked native speakers in Dutch and in English what the term education means literally in their mother tongue and which term they use when they talk about education in their respective national context. The result has surprised me. So you can see the terms in bold that are used generally in daily discourses in the respective country, and their respective literal translation in the other columns. Isn't that surprising? Already in languages that are so similar, like English, Dutch, and German, we can find such different terms that all transport different connotations or meanings. Of course, we all use English as our lingua franca, but we have to be aware of the shifts of meanings that are connected to the words used, especially in English. Mario, yesterday evening we talked about translations, and that translating is an art form per se. And this is exactly the issue I would like to highlight here. An interesting observation in this concept. The term used in the global Anglophone world that dominates the global discourses, for instance, in the context of UNESCO. Here we have the Solar Agenda, the 2010 document on arts education endorsed by all member states of UNESCO. And these international documents, they use always the term arts education. And I'm using it as well because it is shorter. But in European publications, sometimes also in the Compendium, we mostly find the term arts and cultural education. I think already this difference shows that there is a sensitivity towards the term already. Apparently, Europeans differentiate between art and culture, and they don't like to narrow down a broader concept of culture to the concept of arts. And a second observation. Obviously, also the term education is more and more doubted. We can find an increasing number of international publications in English that use the German word Bildung as a foreign word in the meantime, instead of education. Of course, it is not the use of pure words that is the most important issue. Important is the question, which concepts are behind these words? We have to be aware, especially in international projects, and the Compendium is an international project, that we don't know enough about these linguistic issues. That is why I think we need a glossary of the most important terms we are constantly using. ENO founded the European Network of Observatories, founded a working group at its last meeting to prepare for such an exercise. Perhaps this is a good chance to join forces between the Compendium and ENO. This glossary could help to make communication between people using different languages not easier, but more effective. And effectivity in our transnational communication, which means communication across borders, strengthens research, and by this, the field. This is my hope. Something that is needed in the situation, in the political situation we are in at the moment. I'm fully aware that internationally operating companies like, for instance, Coca-Cola, Siemens, Samsung, and so on, they offer intercultural trainings for their employees. An important part of these trainings is to know the connotations of terms used in business as a matter of course. And my plea is, let us be as professional as they are. Let me now come to my third strand. I share your standpoint, the Compendium standpoint, that interculturality is one of the most important issues we have to tackle. This topic is set prominent in your list of themes at the left on your website. Also, ENO is dedicating its first European yearbook of research in arts education to the topic diversity. In respect to the diagram I showed you, we talk now about the socio-political damage. The prominent role of this topic is caused, as we all know, by globalization, migration, and, of course, the nationalistic responses to this development. The triggering developments of globalization and migrations affect all and everything. As I've been emphasizing throughout my speech, we need clear models and a sensitive use of language. This is based in theory and in research. Thus, I would like to share with you some thoughts ENO, the European Network, developed in joint discussion during the last year. They will be published very soon. The question is, how do we talk about diversity? And here, we suggest to use the differentiation between multi, inter, and transcultural approaches. I'm sure you are all familiar with this, thus I can make it short, and I will use simple pictures to demonstrate what I mean. Categories like multi, inter, and transculturalism are helpful for describing and distinguishing possible relationships or interactions between different cultures. Briefly, multiculturalism is predominantly a concept referring to different cultures as self-contained or closed units, like containers existing side by side on a ship. The concept of interculturalism follows the notion of, again, largely closed units. The constellations are similar to billiard balls. There we can observe interaction among the various units, similar to the movements on a pool table. They influence each other by different dynamics, but without changing their inner structure. And transculturalism, the third concept, rejects the idea that cultures are distinguishable units, and instead views them as constructs without clear boundaries. According to this concept, cultures are already mixed in themselves. They are interwoven into an indissoluble network of influences, adaptations, mutual transformations, and so on, like in the cases of rhizomes. And here on the right-hand side we have the mushroom rhizomes Mario just mentioned. It is important to mention that these three terms introduced here are not positioned in a hierarchical way. This is very important for me. The concepts are, again, like in the examples of the dimensions before, equally useful, and they are equally used to describe particular social and cultural contexts and to find ways of engaging with them. And they correspond with daily practice. For instance, we all know the experience of belonging to something on the one hand and the experience of strangeness or alienation on the other. For example, in everyday life, multiculturalism is equivalent to what happens when we are crossing a crowded railway station in a city. You see that there are many different people in the same space. You are aware of this. Sometimes you focus on a conspicuous person, but you don't get attention. Interculturalism, in turn, corresponds to the situation in many classrooms in today's schools in Europe, especially in bigger cities, where pupils from different cultures come together. The respective backgrounds influence their way of communication. Interculturalism here defines the relationship between the students. And transculturalism, by contrast, reflects the multi-layered constitution of individuals, the hybrid and dynamic construction of identity or of the self. This is on the micro level. And you can also transfer it to the similar experiences of nations or cultural regions on the meso or macro level. In the wider context, we can take two other concepts into account. The first one is global culture. It addresses phenomena such as transnational trends in youth cultures on the one hand, or the world of consumption and lifestyles on the other. It is shaped by global brands with transnational economic power like Adidas, Google, Coca-Cola, aiming at promoting standardized production. The second one is monoculture, reflecting a still growing tendency in most European countries. Here we can find an increasing number of political and ideological discourses that aim at enhancing cultural homogenization. They are emphasizing an exclusive national or social or ethnic identity within closed borders, enforcing the cultural construction of the roots of these identities. Based on these categories and psychological theories on behavior patterns and dispositions, we within ELO developed an analytical grid or a kind of typology that could help to clarify the concepts with an adequate selection of terms. This is not quite abstract. The idea to present it here is not to introduce this theoretical approach, but to give an examples of how innovative research responding to these challenges, I'm putting it in hell, research that is qualitative could look like. The typology shows a set of standards strategies used in arts education methods. We can consider these strategies as representations or characteristic sets of dispositions. Thus, we can call them styles as well. They show patterns, how practice in projects respond to the educational demands of our contemporary societies with respect to diversity. We suggest this typology of 4 different categories of attitudes that involve combinations of 2 dimensions. The first dimension is the conviction that one's own practice has to be developed by integrating, absorbing, appropriating influences from other cultures versus the belief that this is not necessary or desirable. So this is the first dimension on the left. And the second dimension is the appreciation or the rejection of the idea that the other is an equal to oneself. The first dimension refers to the understanding of their own culture as open or closed. In the second dimension we have the attitude appreciation of now the other culture. In our proposal we relate these to the concepts of trans, inter, multi and monoculturality to these categories. I think this framework can be used as a tool for analyzing practice, concepts and also past policies in order to build a broad picture of arts education and cultural policy in Europe. I hope you find this approach as exciting as I do. If you are interested in reading more about, please buy the book that will be published by Springer in November this year. The whole system is explained. And please allow me now to share with you a last observation before I come to the end. ENO colleagues from the Netherlands carried out an interesting survey about the status of cultural diversity in arts education and Europe. Marielle Hendricks knows these people quite well. We met at Alcacia in Utrecht in spring, I think. And among many other questions, these questions were given to the respondents. Interesting for me is mainly the second line and the fourth one. The experts in the second line had been asked about their opinions about the goals. Should art education contribute to the appreciation of cultural diversity? And here we find the highest score. The consent is obvious, so 5 is the maximum. And it has the smallest deviation. So experts across Europe acknowledge the role that arts education can play in contributing to the appreciation of cultural diversity. Of course, you can find interesting differences between the different parts of Europe. But in general, I think this is good news. And now please take a look at the last question. The relationship between cultural diversity and national awareness was highlighted in this question. The result shows that the answers are undecided, and we have the largest deviation. Here we can find a form of irritation of the community of arts educators that leads to an inconsistent assessment. The politicization of cultural diversity and national identity that we face at the moment creates such a rigid opposition between concepts. What we can learn from these findings is that orientation is needed. Orientation that is based on a solid ground of knowledge. Thus, we can see how important your work within the Compendium is. So many questions have to be answered, so many problems to be solved. In these politically difficult times, times of turbulences, we need strong positions and clear discourses. That is why the Compendium is needed today more than ever. And congratulations to your work, and I wish this conference a very successful proceeding. Thank you very much.